In this video, we're gonna cover the best MacBooks to buy for college students. We'll cover what matters, what doesn't, how your major or potential major influences your decision, and we'll give you some simple recommendations without all of the technical jargon. If you're new here, my name's Ben, and basically I'm a tech and productivity nerd, and I spend a lot of time learning about laptops and gear. I used both a Windows laptop and a MacBook Pro when I went through college, Windows first and then switched to the MacBook. Now I am a full-on MacBook superfan. And if it matters to you, I did graduate top of my class in college with a 4.0 GPA, which is just to say that I know how to optimize a device for productivity so that it can assist you and make college easier and not more stressful. In my opinion, MacBooks are the best laptops for college, and that could be either the MacBook Air, which is the more budget-friendly but slightly less powerful version, or the MacBook Pro, which is the more expensive but more powerful laptop. And here's why. First off, battery life. Most MacBooks last at least 15 hours. That means you can go basically all day. You don't have to bring a charging cable to class. Second is the Apple ecosystem. If you've got an iPhone or an iPad, the MacBook just works seamlessly with all of that. I know one thing that was a huge game changer for me is when I could use iMessage on my computer. Like all of the time that I used to spend texting people, I just did it on the computer way quicker. Also, the build quality on MacBooks is incredible. They're thin, they're light, but they have incredible performance and feel great even after years of use. Then, like I mentioned, the performance. The Apple Silicon chips that they have now are incredible, and everything on Mac just works super smoothly. I used to be one of those people always comparing specs of like Windows to Macs and everything in between. Even though sometimes the specs on MacBooks look a little bit worse, the way that they work together is super seamless and it's so smooth. And then lastly is the resale value. Say if you're gonna use this laptop for 2 years or 4 years throughout college, it keeps its resale value pretty well, so you'd be able to offload it at the end of that and get a decent amount of money back. All right, now let's talk about why your laptop matters. And the key thing here is to understand that this is an investment. If you are going to spend tens of thousands of dollars every single year going to college, it makes sense to put a little bit more money into your laptop because this is the device that you're going to be using all of the time for doing homework and taking notes and any sort of software you need for your classes. All of that stuff is going to flow through this. It's the number one productivity purchase that you will make. And so like I said earlier, when I was starting out my freshman year at the University of Minnesota, I bought like a $600 or $700 Windows laptop. It wasn't really that good. And it was constantly crashing and it took forever to boot up. And there would be many times like during class where I would have to restart it because I kept running into issues. And I just think of all of the time that I wasted and even things that I missed out on because of that. This didn't quite happen to me, but there's been situations where, it's 11:50 p.m. and you have to submit a paper before midnight and your laptop is freezing or not starting up. You do not want that to happen. So then in my junior year though, I upgraded to the MacBook Pro and it was the best tech decision that I had ever made. It was way faster, it was way smoother, and I was able to do way more things because of it. But I don't want to make it sound like MacBooks are perfect for everyone. There actually are some cases where I would recommend against getting a MacBook. So a few of those are, first, if you are in finance and accounting and you work a lot with Excel. Excel on Mac is just not that great. If you're doing light work with it, it's totally fine. But if you're really getting deep into Excel and doing things like macros, that's probably when you would want to go for Windows instead. Another one is certain engineering students. It makes more sense to have a Windows just because some of the software that you will need is either not available for Macs at all or just not really optimized for it, and so it won't work as well. So if you're using things like SolidWorks or Revit, you want to go with Windows. And you can just look up like what software will I need as, blah, blah, blah engineer, see what it is and see if it's compatible with Mac. There's tons of lists online, so it's pretty easy to figure out. And this is similar for a couple other majors like architecture or game development. A lot of the tools for those either aren't available on Macs or aren't optimized for them. And then the last one that's kind of an asterisk is certain types of computer science. So kind of depending on your school and what sort of stuff you're doing, if you're using a lot of like Windows specific tools, then obviously you want to go with Windows. But otherwise I would say most computer science students, MacBooks are actually a phenomenal choice. And a little bonus tip here, if you know anyone who is an upperclassman or has gone through your major already, ask them what laptop they have and what they might recommend. They'll be able to tell you like what sort of software they use and whether it'd be better to do Windows or Mac. All right, now let's talk about what actually matters when you are buying a MacBook. First up, the number one is going to be RAM. You want to get at least 8 gigabytes. If you can afford it, 16 or 24 is best. that allows you to multitask, have more tabs open, things like that. Now, if you're buying the latest models of MacBook, all of those start at 16 gigabytes of RAM now, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you're buying refurbished or used, some of the older ones might just be 8 gigabytes. If possible, get 16. Then storage, I would strongly recommend at least getting 512 gigabytes as the minimum amount of storage. Some devices you can get with 256, and that works. It's just that over the course of your college career, you're probably going to have a lot of files and a lot of stuff end up being stored in your device. And it's really cumbersome to get an external hard drive and carry that around everywhere when you're going to classes and you're going to work and doing things like that. It just becomes a lot. So if possible, get 512 gigs. Then there's screen size. And this one, there's a lot of heated arguments on both sides. Basically, if you get a smaller one, it's going to be lighter, it's going to be more portable, but obviously it's smaller. So it's really up to you. I think anywhere in the range of 13 to 15 inches is going to be pretty solid. So for example, if you're getting the MacBook Pro, there's a 14-inch and a 16-inch version. I would go for the 14-inch personally, just if you're going through college, because it is easier to take around places. The Air, you can kind of choose if you want the 13-inch or the 15-inch. And then next up is weight. So just consider that you are carrying this every day, and this goes right along with screen size, but if it's heavier, you're carrying this every single day, so that might start to add up. Just keep that in mind. All right, then let's talk about what doesn't matter as much. And the first one is, supposing you are on a budget, you're trying to save some money, the difference between an M4 versus an M3 versus an M2 probably is not going to be that big of a difference for most people's use cases in college. The M4 processor chip is obviously fastest, it's the latest version, but if you're trying to save money, you can get a refurbished or a slightly used M2 device, and it's not going to be that much worse. Next up is going to be the screen technology, so things like mini LED or nanotech display. Nanotech display is a newer thing that's available on Pros, and it basically makes your screen a little bit sharper and also reduces glare. So things like that are kind of a nice to have, but definitely not a need to have. I will say though, if you have it in the budget and you want to be using your laptop outside a lot, I think a lot of people do that during college, then it actually would be good to get the nanotech just because it does reduce glare. So you can actually sit out there and use it and you're not like squinting at the screen the whole time. And then the last kind of general tip here is understand the needs of your major. And if you aren't in some sort of STEM field, you probably don't need crazy specs like tons of RAM or tons of storage. And so I personally wouldn't spend extra to get that stuff if you don't need it. Like if you were doing English or nursing or chemistry, those ones you probably don't need a maxed out MacBook Pro. All right, now let's jump into some actual recommendations. And the good news here is I have a pretty clear pick for #1 recommendation for most college students. And that is going to be the M4 MacBook Air. You can get the base model, but I would recommend upgrading the storage to 512 gigabytes. Like I said, that's the only thing that I would change. And this is great because it's lightweight, it's silent, there's cool colors like the sky blue color. It's just a really solid overall pick, and for most people, it's gonna be able to handle what you need. Now, if you are in some sort of STEM major, and I'm including things like design or architecture in that as well, where you're using a lot of software and you're having to do a lot of rendering and things like that, that's where I would recommend bumping it up to the MacBook Pro and get the M4 MacBook Pro base model. If you have the budget, it makes sense to start upgrading RAM and storage a little bit in that, but you probably don't need anything crazy for college. But now I get laptops are expensive, and so you might be wondering, okay, Ben, cool, but is there any other cheaper options or ways that I can get deals? And what I would recommend then is looking down into refurbished or used versions of the M3 series of MacBooks, or even the M2s if you're really trying to save money. As you go down more, you maybe want to upgrade the specs a little bit just to kind of compensate for the wear and tear that a device that is older will have. But something like the M2 Air with 512 gigs of storage, maybe a little bit of extra RAM, that's still gonna be pretty solid. So I'll throw up on screen here a little chart of majors and my personal recommendations for MacBook. As you can see, a lot of these are going to be the M4, just because that is a really solid machine for college, and it's going to be worth the investment, at least in my opinion. But we've got more, because I don't want to just stop there. If you are trying to save money, there are a couple things that you can do. The first, #1, is definitely make sure to make use of Apple's education discount. You can do this online or in store. Usually Apple will offer about $100 or $150 off of a device if you can prove that you're a student. This is a phenomenal deal. Sometimes you even get a little bonus on top, like an extra gift card or AirPods or something like that. There's also plenty of good ways to buy refurbished. A site I like is called Back Market. They have lots of used and refurbished devices on there that are usually pretty good quality. So you can check out one of those if you want to save additional money. Another site you can use if you don't want to pay all up front, because that is a lot of money to just be like handing over all at once, is called Upgraded. The site is getupgraded.com. And with them, you pay over 36 months, can be from 0% interest. So you check if you qualify for that. It doesn't run like a hard credit check or anything like that. And if you buy something like the base model MacBook Air, it starts at like $33 a month. Then I mentioned Back Market before. They're really solid, but a couple other options for like refurbished or used devices are going to be Apple's refurbishment program that they have. Also, a lot of the big box stores like Best Buy have a similar program, so you can check what they've got. Then lastly, let's talk about, are there any key accessories you should get with a MacBook if you're going to college? I would say yes, there is. First one, number one, is some sort of external mouse. Now, if you never use a mouse, just disregard this advice. Like, some people are kind of different. I just think a mouse is way faster and way more efficient than always using the trackpad. Trackpad's good for like a decent amount of stuff, but if you're designing or editing or doing intense stuff, like, it makes sense to have a mouse. Second, for a lot of people, it'll make sense to get a USB-C hub just because the MacBook won't necessarily have all of the ports that you need. If you're ever, say, plugging into a monitor to present in front of your class, sometimes you might need an HDMI for that, and not all of them will have that. I would recommend getting a laptop sleeve or a case, especially if your backpack doesn't have that good of padding, just because, again, you're gonna be carrying this around everywhere. And so even if there's a couple times where you drop it or it gets scratched, like, that stuff starts to add up, and then it doesn't look as nice, it doesn't work as well. So it just makes sense to protect this, again, because it's an investment. Lastly, tying into that, I would here recommend getting Apple Care with your device if you're taking it to college, just because there's a lot of stuff that can happen. There's tons of moving parts, you're running around all the time. It makes sense to just be protected. And so that if something does happen, you get it replaced very quickly, and you're not left like a week and a half without a device when you need one in order to do well in your classes. Okay, final thoughts. Your laptop is the most used tool across your college career. So it makes sense to invest into it. You don't want it to be the thing slowing you down. And the way I always think about it is, if you get a really good computer, it allows you to be more productive with your studying. You're probably gonna do a little bit better in college. You're probably gonna get a better job because of that. And that means you're going to make up for the money that you'd spent on it anyways. I know it's hard, especially when you're starting out, like, you don't have a ton of money. I was in the exact same shoes. But if you can, it makes sense to spend a little bit more just so you have a great device to work with. Again, my number one recommendation is the M4 MacBook Air with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 512 gigs of storage. You can upgrade that to the Pro or look to some of the older refurbished models if you want to save money. All right, that's it. That's all I got. If you have any more questions, put them down in the comments. I try to respond to all of those, and I'm more than happy to help. I'll see you next time.